aspects of our business, but we focus first on an overall audit and assessment of what companies have for their large, kind of broad definition of telecommunications: internet, phone service, data services, security, collaboration tools, cellular phones, all that fun stuff, phone systems. And we look to first recover money for clients from billing errors, other mistakes, and then provide cost avoidance, right? And when it comes to cost avoidance, what we often look for there is how can we find budget for new projects? Maybe there's an upgrade to a contact center that's needed. Maybe there's a cybersecurity upgrade that's needed, right? So often we find budget through our cost recovery and then cost avoidance to help clients fund new projects. And one of those potential services that clients may be looking for is what we're going to discuss today. So I want to introduce Kevin Thomsen from Maxxsure, Chief Revenue Officer. Kevin, thank you for joining today and for going through the presentation. And when we talk about like cyber risk, cyber security, cyber prevention, remediation, insurance, all that fun stuff, they're not new topics, obviously, right? But when the question is asked, internally of what risk or what exposure do we have, if there were to be an incident, often that answer is very nebulous, or it's answered in the abstract, right? Because people often don't know. So today, and correct me if I'm wrong, but today, what you're going to talk about is, how can we truly quantify that risk? Fair statement?
Absolutely, and thank you so much to the Prelude team for inviting us. And that is absolutely the topic of conversation today, and hopefully the listeners, after meeting here, have a different perspective on how to look at risk and their view and the financial impact of that risk. The whole crux and like the big punch right out of the gate is we had a major client that everyone on this call, I'm sure of, not only knows, but has used products from them. And this individual, the CISO, had any tool under the sun that they wanted. InfoSec teams, incredible talent. But what they did not have was a real-time view in what the top risks of the day are and what the financial impact is. And so that's what you're going to be able to gain from this. But the punchline here that's on the screen is, and this is very simple, this is what we do. Maxxsure helps companies know what to do to limit cyber exposure. So, Chris, if we could go to the next slide. Why is this relevant? And to Bob's point, this isn't a new topic, but yet when you look at these stakeholders, which it could be a Fortune 5, Fortune 1000, or your everyday 5-person office, this conversation's happening. And so you have the chief financial officer, really the left side of the screen is fiduciary leadership. And some of the questions and insights that these individuals have are we spending money in the right place? Is it being done optimally? How well are we doing against the plan, right? Budgets have gone up for cyber year over year. How well are we doing? If we were to have a bad day tomorrow, an incident, do I know what my financial liabilities are by risk type, by line of business? And then we've been paying insurance for ever, seemingly. Is it the right amount? Am I going to get dollar for dollar back? Or am I going to get 30 cents on the dollar? What's the probability of a successful claim, right? So these are all questions. And mind you, the CFO is responsible. I think 70% of companies in North America, all IT and security budgets are being run by fiduciary leadership. And then you have your CEO, and your CEO is all about, hey, if we have an incident, how does this impact revenue? Who's liable? Will outside counsel represent us if there's a negligence claim or class action? And then what if my security officer leaves? right? The average tenure of a CISO is 2.5 years now in North America. And then you have the operators of the business, and they're all about the downstream effects of if something were to occur, how do the buses run on time? And then you have your IT and security, the group that is given a little to make a lot, right? How do we help IT and security, and this is what we're hearing in the boardroom, justify the resources, actually asking for budget and getting budget, not asking for $1 and getting 40 cents. And then how do we show the value that we're creating with the small team that we have? And so the overarching theme of this conversation is there's different stakeholders, there's different personalities, and there's different communication styles. But it's in everyday businesses, this is the same narrative. So how do you get everyone to sing from the same sheet of music if only half the table here can read a sheet of music? And that's the crux of the entire cybersecurity conversation in the boardroom. And thankfully, we have solutions that can actually solve every single one of these questions. Next slide, please. Thank you, Chris. And if you can just click through to the end, that'll be, there you go. All right, I love drawing an analogy here, and especially on a webinar, is a grocery store. Everyone knows a grocery store. A grocery store does inventory on the shelves, receivables, probably every day, right? Once a day, close hours. A retail store, maybe a couple times a week. But like Walmart or Amazon, they're doing inventory fractions of a second, right? Real time. So I pose a question to everybody in the audience. Why is it that companies are doing inventory on their cyber controls or assessments just once a year? Doesn't that seem crazy? Well, that's what's happening right now. That's the decades-old tradition. And so when you look at that middle bucket there, that's that events-based management. That's your one-time assessment on a PDF. That's your business impact analysis delivered via PDF. That's your GRC and risk registry living in Excel, right? And where Maxxsure and the entire industry is now going is how do you get real-time insights into your risks? And then tie that financial narrative to it so that the folks that are intimidated by the word cybersecurity can actually participate in the conversation. Because with the emergence of AI and all the headlines that you see, and whether it be in social media or in the news, the threat landscape has never been larger than it is today. Therefore, the board is also being shaped differently. Instead of having a subject matter expert that deals with legal, most boards are mandating that there needs to be a subject matter expert that can deal with cybersecurity. Because that, whether it be, bad guys trying to get you or the good guys that inadvertently clicked on a link inside your business, or systems glitches or vendors that you have, each and every single company is at risk like they've never been before. And so, Chris, if you could go to the next slide, really how we articulate this, and for those of you on here that are technical buyers, you're going to be familiar with the phrase I'm about to bring to the table, which is tool fatigue. Tool fatigue is real. And why it's real is because for the past 2 decades, when you had a problem, you bought a tool. And Chris, if you could click just one more, you could see the points here. Right now, most companies have purchased some really incredible vulnerability and software inventory, and you have your Microsoft, you have your insurance, you have some sort of governance, whether it be a NIST or a HIPAA or CMMC or whatever controls the company wants to be good at. And then you have your financials. None of that data talks to each other. So it's now on a human to synthesize the data, correlate it, amplify what's critical, drown out what's busy, and then translate that into a language that that respective stakeholder can understand. And that's really, really hard. And so, Chris, if you could go to the next slide, what is it that Maxxsure's doing? And it's very, very simple. We're turning inventory into value. So we take your cyber asset inventory, and that's your infrastructure, that's your governance, that's your people data, that's your applications, that's where in the world you work, geopolitical, and where do you have headcount and your supply chain. And then you add the business value perspectives, going back to that first slide I opened up with. And now you have a real-time view at any moment of your business risk. And that is precisely what we are doing to help companies at any given time understand down to the dollar what they stand to lose, set board level parameters on risk capacity, appetite, and tolerance, and then give you metrics, if you could go to the next slide, Chris, to actually help de-risk. So where Bob and the Prelude team have done such an amazing job to the community is really asking the question, if you were to have a bad day tomorrow, could you quantify your risk down to the dollar? Most, if not everyone, says, no, I cannot. But with Maxxsure, you can. And so here's an example of a $300 million a year business. And based on their data speaking back to them through our algorithms, through Maxxsure platform, they have a $29 million liability, which is 2 years worth of EBITDA. And the probability, if you look at that orange bar on the bottom, is just a shade under 20%. And so what's comprised of these metrics is the fact that you have a certain number of sensitive records. There's some IP there that if that was to be compromised from a foreign state, could be detrimental to the business. If there's a ransomware or a lockout or a service disruption, similar to some of the third-party incidents that we saw last summer. And then there's fines, fees, judgments, class action, and then there's the reputational ding. And so we customize this approach for each and every business that becomes a Maxxsure client. And so if you could go to the next slide, Chris, and we can tie off on this.
Actually,
Yeah.
quick question, Kevin, that came up in the chat here is what metrics or benchmarks resonate most with the leadership and the board members when presenting this cyber risk quantification?
Go to the next slide and you're going to actually be able to see a clear depiction of that. Tough to see, and we can't wait to walk you through it, but when a company and the risk committee at the board can define risk tolerance, it's a financial metric, appetite, and then capacity. It's like, we can't afford more than this. And you chart that out. And then you have all of the operating environment, people data, infrastructure data, software inventory, reading back, and then we're tying that, your data based on real-time cost and loss ratios. You're going to be able to see what line of business or what workload or what part of the business is out of bounds. So you're bringing fact, not feeling, but razor sharp acuity to where should we be spending our time, energy, and effort because we are lean, and what's going to have the most dramatic financial impact if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, but it's Bob again. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, One of the comments that I hear a lot in the field is whether you're IT or in the security discipline, needing help from CFO, CEO, other board members to the fiduciary responsibility, people with a fiduciary responsibility, to almost share that responsibility or share that work in security, in cybersecurity. That cybersecurity is not an IT function, it should be a C-level function. Do you agree with that? And is that kind of what you are able to provide here, or just in general, like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And there's a really good Albert Einstein quote, and we like take it to heart here. A clever person will fix a problem, a wise person will avoid it. And so when you're looking at fiduciary leadership, who traditionally they speak a different language, right? Dollars and cents, P&L, financial acumen, right? And cyber has come from the back office in the basement all the way to, the top floor, right? Where there are board representatives there. And so when you're looking at the CFO, KPIs and measurements are just, native, right? It's part of their natural language. So let's 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 run a scenario here. Is there a KPI or measurement for uptime? Yeah, it's 5 nines. Is there a measurement for transaction speed or capacity or size or sales sold? Yeah, there's always a measurement. How do you know if you're good at cybersecurity or not? There's no measurement. It's either did I get stung yesterday or did I not? And so we're bringing a measured, fact-based approach to cyber where you can measure effectiveness. How well are we doing against the dollars that have been spent? What's in the environment that I haven't paid for? And if something were to happen, what would real use case costs and losses, what does that look like in our environment? Can we afford a breach? Can we afford not to fund that next project or that next tool or that next consultant? And so it's bringing the CISO and the technology team closer together with fiduciary leadership, where there's a common metric and talk track and language that they can communicate effectively. And so that the board and the CFO do not glaze over when the IT security team is coming in and speaking in the acronym soup that is traditionally being done, because it's just technical narrative talking to a financial narrative. It's like oil and water. This bridges the gap. And we're seeing companies use this as a benchmark for all discussion, all reporting, whether it be SEC and 10K-S1 or other. And so hopefully that answers your question, Bob. And that's a really great one.
Yeah, it does. And a follow-up question, not to get into cost structure or even what the components are, but your example was a $300 million entity. Can you just expand on or just talk about the value of your tool in SMB, mid-market versus enterprise? And is it any different for the profile company? Obviously, the larger the company, if they're publicly traded, the more exposure they have. But just across the board, like how the tool maybe fits into those three different, market segments.
Okay. When you use a methodology like inventory, so it could be a small hometown sporting goods store or the largest, Dick's Sporting Goods chain, right? This is a good example here. Both run inventory, both need to. Maybe one's automated and maybe one's, you got to count the shelves at the day before. But the singular question, answer to your question is, for SMB mid-market, you might not have a CISO. but you still have risk. You can still be compromised. It's going to be a major financial hit. So the need is you're taking maybe non-technical folks, a CFO and a COO that has to wear dual hats to actually have some sort of idea of what's going on in the environment and where you score. This is invaluable. It's almost like your virtual CISO, right? You have a program in place, even though that you're of smaller size, with very prescriptive, here's what you do next. Here's your top risks of the day, and here's the financial impact of those risks. Let's go solve the top 3 today. So that's on the smaller side, and it's ongoing. You can have a TV dedicated in your small office, dedicated to what are the top risks of the day, and from there you're managing that on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis. For the enterprise, the more regulated, the better, because the company and your industry is mandating you implement certain controls and governance, whether it be CMMC if you're working with the government, whether it be HIPAA, whether it be Sarbanes-Oxley or NIST or any homegrown framework. The company and the board saying, you have to be good at this. Okay, well, how do you know if you're good at it or not? That's where Maxxsure comes in. You take the operating environment, you match that against those controls, and then you see where you're good, where you're bad, and where you need an improvement. But it's always also rolled up to what is the financial impact by risk, by day, by minute that gives leadership the ability to focus time, energy, and effort so that they can go faster for hopefully more effective spend. And that's what our customers are absolutely raving about, is that they've never had to hire someone else to run Maxxsure. If anything, you're making the environment more productive, de-risked, you have leverage at insurance negotiation, and you have an active risk registry. And that's all part of a risk program and risk quantification that this market has been primed for disruption. And thankfully, through Prelude and Maxxsure, we're doing such.
Yep. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
And Kevin, as we wind down here, one last question I have for you is, if you give the boards one action to take immediately after this webinar, what would it be to limit that exposure and strengthen oversight?
One action is ask yourself, if a customer, board member, or me asked you, do you know what your top 5 risks are today and what the financial impact is? And if you can't instantly understand that, you're a prime candidate. Because if you do not have that at your fingertips, that means you have stuff living in disparate systems. And in the event that an incident does happen, are you prepared? Or is it going to be chaos? And so it goes back to the opening statement of Maxxsure helps companies know what to do to limit cyber exposure. And that's that avoidance and that's the proactive versus the reactive. So that's what I would be telling boards is ask yourself, do you know your top risks instantly? And if you don't, we would love to show you how you can, and this would make you much better. And that's the whole root of today, is to try to set up some demonstrations to make people better, faster, and more effective.